So these uncles slept with their cousin when she came home for holidays. Her name is Brianna. So let's dive right in. She came home for the holidays to the one place she had always felt completely safe, the house she grew up in, the family she loved, the uncles who used to carry her on their shoulders when she was just 5 years old. Her parents were upstairs, asleep. Everything looked normal. Everything smelled like home, pine needles, her mother's cooking still lingering in the air, the faint sound of the television left on in the back room. But downstairs, something was already happening. Something that would shatter every single thing she believed about the word family. Something that no 21-year-old woman should have or should ever have to survive. And the worst part, the system that was supposed to protect her almost let them get away with it. Before we dive in deeper, right? Tell me in the comments where you are watching from. I honestly want to know how far my videos travel, because I tell these true crime stories to educate and create awareness on this particular aspect of our life: family betrayals, family assault, and make sure people get educated about the patterns, how these predators operate in our families. It's very important. So let's dive right in. It was December 23rd, 2 nights before Christmas. The kind of cold that makes you pull your blanket tighter and think about nothing except warmth and rest and being close to the people you love. The Williams family home sat on a quiet street in a small suburb outside of Columbus, Ohio. The kind of neighborhood where everybody knows everybody, where you wave at your neighbors, where the idea of danger feels like something that only exists on television screen. And for 21-year-old Brianna Williams, that is her name, Brianna Williams, but I call her Brian, don't mind me. And for 21-year-old Brianna Williams, coming back to this house after her first semester away at college felt exactly like exhaling after holding your breath for months. She had missed it. She had missed the creaky third step on the staircase. She had missed the smell of her mother's sweet potato pie cooling on the counter. She had missed the sound of her dad watching late night sports in the bedroom upstairs, the low hum of commentary drifting under the door. Brianna set her back down by the couch, poured herself a glass of water from the kitchen, and settled into the living room. It was almost midnight. The rest of the house was quiet. Her parents had already gone to bed, and her three uncles, Jonathan, Reggie, and Sam, were still up, which was not unusual. They were always the last ones awake during family gatherings. She had grown up knowing them as the fun uncles, the ones who cracked jokes at Thanksgiving, the ones who slipped her $20 bills when her parents weren't looking. At first, the conversation felt completely normal. That means they were discussing the three uncles and Brianna. Jonathan handed her a soda. Reggie made a joke about her college food. Sam sat across from her, arms crossed, saying very little, which again was normal for Sam. He had always been the quietest of the three, but within about 15 minutes, something shifted. She could not immediately name what it was. It was more of a feeling than a fact. A drop in the temperature of the room that had nothing to do with the weather outside. The jokes stopped being funny. The laughter started sounding different, harder, more deliberate. And then the questions started. Personal questions. The kind of questions that made her shift in her seat. She told herself she was overthinking it. These were her family members. When she had men she had known, her entire life. Men who sat at the same dinner table as her parents every single year. She took a sip of her soda and reminded herself of that. But the feeling did not go away. It grew. Reggie moved to sit closer to her on the couch. Jonathan stood up and walked to the doorway, not to leave, just to stand there. And Sam, who had been quiet all evening, suddenly looked up at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. And in that moment, deep in her chest, Brianna Williams felt something she would later describe to a detective as pure terror. Not the kind you feel watching a scary movie, the kind that roots itself in your body and screams at you that something is very, very wrong. She tried to stand up. Reggie put a hand on her shoulder and told her to relax. His voice was calm. That was the part that scared her most. It was so calm. Like she had already decided, or like he had already decided how this night was going to go. Like there was no version of Yvette where she just walked upstairs and went to bed. And she thought about her parents, asleep above her head. She thought about calling out for them, but she also thought about what these men might do if she screamed. The house was quiet, the street outside was quiet, and the three people who could have protected her were behind a closed door 2 floors above her head, completely unaware of what was unfolding in the living room beneath them. What happened in that living room over the next 2 hours would change everything. Wow, 2 hours. 2 hours. Ooh, 2 hours. But the real question, the question that will haunt you for the rest of this video is how did it even get to this point? And who knew? Who saw the signs? And who did nothing? She came home. This is the name of this story. She came home. That's the name of this story. Because that's exactly what she did. She came home and home destroyed her. This is the story of Brianna Williams, 21 years old, college student, daughter, niece, a young woman who by every account from everyone who knew her was one of the most trusting, warm-hearted, family-loving people you could ever meet. And this is the story of what three men, Jonathan Williams, age 44, Reginald Williams, age 39, and Samuel Williams, age 36, did to her on the 9th of December 23rd. Three uncles, three brothers, one family, one crime that took years, a collapsed investigation, a failed social service, and one incredibly brave woman to finally bring to light. This story is based on real documented cases of family sexual assault in the United States. Cases where victims were failed not just by their abusers but by the very systems designed to protect them. Names and identifying details have been changed to protect the survivor, but the patterns, the failures, the pain, those are real. And they are happening right now in homes that look exactly like the one Brianna grew up in. So stay with me because this story matters. To understand what happened to Brianna, you first need to understand who she was and who this family was. Because this was not a cold, distant, troubled household. This was a family that went to church together. A family with photographs on every wall and holiday traditions that stretched back 30 years. Wow. All right. A family where the adults sat on the porch in the summer and the kids ran through the sprinklers in front yard and nobody locked their doors during the day because they trusted every single person on that street, and most of all, they trusted each other. Brianna was the oldest of three children born to Denise and Patricia Williams. Denise worked in logistics management for a mid-sized freight company. Patricia was a registered nurse who worked the day shift at Children's Hospital 20 minutes from their home. They were by every measured devoted parents. Not perfect, no parent is, but devoted. The kind of parents who showed up to every school play, who argued about whether Brianna was eating enough vegetables, who cried at her high school graduation like she had just won a Nobel Prize. She was their pride, their firstborn, and when she got into Ohio State on a partial academic scholarship, the entire extended family celebrated like she had climbed Mount Everest. The three uncles, Jonathan, Reggie, and Sam, were Denise's younger brothers. They had all grown up in the same house, attended the same schools, worshipped at the same church. Jonathan, the oldest of the three, was a mechanic with his own small auto shop. He had a loud laugh and a strong opinions about football, and was the kind of man who could work a room at a family but sorry and was the kind of man who could work a room at a family barbecue like a politician. Reggie was the middle brother, quieter than Jonathan, but more charming. The kind of charm that made you feel seen when he paid attention to you. And Sam, the youngest, was harder to read. He kept himself mostly, or he kept to himself mostly. Worked irregular jobs, never quite found his footing the way his brothers did. Brianna had grown up around all three of them her entire life. They were fixtures at every birthday, every holiday, every Sunday dinner. And for most of her childhood, she had thought of them the way most children think of their extended family, as background characters in the warm, familiar story of her life. Safe people, known people, her uncles. But somewhere in the years between her childhood and the night she came home from college, something had changed. Something slow and imperceptible had been building. And the thing about something that builds slowly is that by the time you finally see it clearly, it is already too late. When Brianna left for Columbus in August of that year, she was excited. She was nervous. She was 18 and full of possibility, and the world felt enormous in the best possible way. She called her mother 3 times a week. She sent her father memes about football. She studied hard, made friends on her dorm floor, joined a campus women's group that focused on community advocacy. She was thriving. And when December came and the semester ended and her roommates flew home to Atlanta and the campus grew quieter, Brianna packed her duffel bag and drove the 90 minutes back to the house she had grew up in. And she felt nothing but relief. She was going home. She was going to see her family. She was safe, or so she thought. She arrived on the afternoon of December 22nd. Her mother had made her favorite meal, baked chicken and rice with the seasoning Brianna had been requesting since she was 7 years old. Her father hugged her at the door for a long time without saying a word. Her younger brother and sister ran to her like she had been gone for years instead of months. And that evening, as the family gathered in the living room and the Christmas tree lights cast their warm glow across the room, Brianna looked around at everyone she loved and thought to herself that there was nowhere in the world she could rather be. She could rather be. She had no way of knowing that within 30 hours, that feeling would be gone forever. That this house, this family, this sense of safety would never feel the same again. They were always around, always there, always watching. And at the time that felt like love. And at the time that felt like love. Looking back, it meant something else entirely. Here's the part of this story that will make you go back and replay every moment. Because the warning signs were there. They had always been there. Brianna just did not have the language for them yet. She had not been taught to name what she was saying. And that, more than anything, is the part of this story that has to change. The first memory she could trace back was from when she was around 13. It was a summer evening, one of those long ones where it doesn't get dark until 9 o'clock. The family was outside. Her parents were talking to neighbors across the fence, and Uncle Reggie walked up behind her while she was sitting on the porch steps and said something about how she was becoming a real woman. She had felt her skin crawl. She didn't know why. She was 13 and didn't have the vocabulary for what she felt. But she remembered moving away from him and pretending she needed to go inside. She never mentioned it to anyone. It seemed too small, too easy to misinterpret. And besides, he was her uncle. She told herself she was being dramatic. But there were other moments, small things, the kind of things that, taken individually, a child or teenager could convince themselves were nothing. Uncle Jonathan making comments about her body during a holiday gathering when she was 16, framed as a compliment about how much she had grown, but delivered in a tone that made her mother's sister glance across the other room with an expression that lasted half a second before disappearing. That glance, Brianna remembered Brianna remembered that glance years later and understood exactly what it meant. Someone else had felt it too. Someone else had noticed, and no one said a word. That's really bad. There was a time around her 17th birthday when Sam had asked her to come help him carry something from his car. Okay? And when they were outside alone, he had stood too close to her and spoken too quietly, and she had felt a rush of something. Not quite fear, but its quieter cousin, and she had made an excuse and gone back inside. She had never told her parents because what would you say or what would she say? Uncle Sam stood too close to me. Her parents loved these men. These men were at every family dinner. These men were her father's brothers. And she had been raised in a household that valued family above almost everything else. The idea of accusing someone in her whole bloodline of making her feel unsafe felt like a kind of betrayal she wasn't equipped to make at 17. And that is exactly how it works. That is the exact pattern that researchers and forensic psychologists who studied familiar abuse have documented again and again. The grooming does not begin with an assault. It begins with a comment, a look, a small invasion of space, a moment that passes too quickly to report but stays too long in the body to forget. It begins with the perpetrator learning very carefully, very deliberately what the victim will dismiss, what she will excuse, what she will absorb in silence to protect the peace of the family she loves. They study their victims the way a chess player studies a board. Whew. And by the time December by the time December came and Brianna drove from the college, all three of those men had been studying her for years. Think about that for a moment. Think about the life she was living. The girl going to school, calling her mom, eating in the dining hall, living in blissful ignorance of what was being planned for her. And think about the family gatherings she attended during those years, the Thanksgivings, the 4th of July cookouts, the Christmas mornings, and the fact that in every single one of those photographs of smiling people around the table, something was already wrong. Something had already started. She just didn't know it yet. I want to ask you something, and I want you to sit with it. Have you ever had a moment, a look, a comment, a feeling that you talked yourself out of because the person was family? Because the cost of naming it felt too high, because you love the people around that person and didn't want to be the one who disrupts everything. If you have, I want to know you are not alone, and I want you to keep watching because Brianna's story is about what happens when those moments are never addressed. Exactly. At that time, or at the time, she brushed it off. At the time, she called it nothing. But those moments were never nothing. They were a map that led to the 9th of December 23rd. In the 24 hours before the assault, the behavior of all three men became more deliberate, more visible. Not to Brianna's parents, Denise and Patricia were busy with the preparation that come with having your whole family together for Christmas. Patricia was making lists, wrapping gifts, coordinating where people will sleep. Denise was in the garage fixing a leak in the water heater that had been giving him trouble all week. They were occupied, and the three brothers knew. Looking back, that detail, the business of Brianna's parents, feels less like coincidence and more like calculation. Honestly. On the evening of 22nd, in the night Brianna arrived, Jonathan made a comment at the dinner table that her mother laughed off as bad joke. Something about Brianna being all grown up now and how college boys better watch out. Her mother swatted him on the arm and changed the subject. Her father looked briefly uncomfortable and then it passed. And Brianna sat there and smiled the way you smile when you want to disappear. She ate her baked chicken. She talked to her siblings. She told herself it was nothing. These men had always been like this. A little rough around the edges, a little too comfortable with off-color jokes. She had survived it her whole life. Alright, we're going to stop here because I want this video to be around 20 minutes. If you want the part 2 of this case, you want to see how the perpetrators were punished, how the law took its effect against these three men, subscribe and like this video. If this video gets 50 likes, I'm posting the part 2 of this case next. If this video gets 50 likes. So thank you.